Okay, let's talk about Ross chapter 11. Ross 11 has to do with what are called the pronouns. In 11.1, we're dealing with the personal pronouns. Okay? Personal pronouns. And they are referred to as independent personal pronouns. So let's talk about what those words mean. First of all, pronouns. How do we typically, in grammar, how do we typically define a pronoun? It's a part of speech that does what?
It replaces the first.
Yes. It replaces a noun. So nouns are persons, places, things. Pronouns replace a noun. So if I have a word like Moses, say Moses went up the mountain, then I want to use a pronoun. I can replace Moses with what pronoun? He. Exactly. Okay? So Moses is my noun, he is my pronoun. Pronouns replace nouns. And then what we have here is the word personal. Okay? So personal pronouns are pronouns that mark person. What are my persons? First, second, and third person, right? So personal means they mark person as well as gender and number. So just as our personal endings had person, gender, and number on verbs, our pronouns can have person, gender, and number when they are the personal pronouns. And then there is this word independent. Independent means that the pronoun occurs written as a word all by itself. It's not attached to anything, like sometimes prepositions are attached. Also, if you look at the personal endings on the verb chart, the personal endings that mark who's doing the subject, those are attached at the end of the verb. But these independent personal pronouns we're going to talk about, they are written as separate words. Okay? And what I want to do here is I want to walk you through what the independent personal pronouns are in Hebrew. The function of these independent personal pronouns is going to be almost always as the subject of the verb. So as you know, if we take a verb like pakadti, and I wrote that down here for you, pakadti, right here, that verb has a personal ending, t, and that t already tells you that the subject is who? I. Exactly. So do I need an independent personal pronoun to tell you who the subject is? No. The personal ending on the perfect verb is sufficient to do that. So when I have a personal pronoun, an independent personal pronoun being used as the subject, it's redundant. It's redundant. Don't have to use it. And that usually means when it is used that the writer uses it for a reason, that he is trying to draw some sort of point of contrast. For example, I might say something like, I am from Assyria, but she is from Babylon, right? Or I eat peanut butter and she eats chocolate. So those personal pronouns would be used in situations like that. Now, what I've done here is I've taken our verb chart of the personal endings and I've laid over this some highlighting and then the actual personal pronouns in Hebrew, which are just to the right of each of the sets of boxes. Okay, so those are the personal pronouns. And I want you to see that for most of these pronouns, there is some similarity or correspondence between the personal pronouns, the subject pronouns, independent subject pronouns, and the personal endings that you've already learned. All right? So let's walk through this, and we'll jot down what these mean as well. First thing to notice, though, is that in Hebrew, in our chart for the personal pronouns, this is true in Ross on page 94 when he gives you the personal pronouns, and it's true here on my little handout. is that we are starting with the third person and working our way down to the first person. Okay? Just like our verbs do. And for our third masculine singular independent personal pronoun, the form is who, and for the feminine form, it's he. What does who mean? Who is he, and he is she. Okay? We've already talked about this. So that's how I say he did something and she did something, and I use the overt, explicit subject pronoun to do it. Now, if you look down at the second masculine singular and second feminine singular, the pronouns are ata and at. Ata and at. And these are both you, but one of them is a masculine singular you and one's a feminine singular you. What do we notice about the verbs or the forms here? Well, if you compare the form ata with the personal ending ta, do you notice that the second half of ata sounds just like the personal ending for you man did something? Pakad ta. If I wanted to say you pakadta, it'd be ata pakadta. You see the ta-ta here? Okay? It's because the personal ending really is related to this personal pronoun here. And then the second feminine singular personal ending is t with a silent shava. And notice that the form for the pronoun is at with a silent shava here. So at pakat. At pakat. Okay? So I have tavs and corresponding vowels. I have a hey as well on the personal pronoun. What kind of a hey is this? Is this a real consonant hey or is it a mater hey? That's right. That is a mater hey. And so if it were spelled defectively, how would it be spelled? Ata would be spelled how? Well, without the hey if it were spelled defectively. Now look at the ta without the hey. It looks just like the ta at the end of the personal ending, you see? So I just want you to see that these do correspond to each other. It's just that we have the full spelling of the ta almost all the time in our personal pronoun. Now, the last thing on the singular side is the first common singular pronoun. And there's actually two forms of it, okay? Ani and anohi. Ani and anohi. Notice that both of these have a Keurig yod at the end. Ani, anohi. And how does the personal ending of the first common singular end? It ends with a Keurig yod after the tav. T, as in pakad ti. Okay? So I've highlighted the similarities just so that you can see them. Now let's go over to the plural side. And, here, I should put I. Oops. We want to do this in red, just to keep those together. So I. Now over here, I have the third common plural for my personal ending, right? But for the pronouns, we will actually distinguish the masculine versus the feminine third person plural pronoun. In other words, if I want to use the pronoun they, I have to choose either the masculine or the feminine form. And my basic form is Haim if it's masculine, they, and Hane if it's feminine, they. Notice that these are identical to each other except for the mem versus the noon. And if you see a mem, that tells you it's what gender? Masculine. Let the mem, which is an M, remind you of the M of third masculine plural, okay? If it's mem, it's masculine. Now, if you look at the Ross textbook, you also learn that there are two alternate forms for Haim and Hane, and they're simply forms that add an unstressed comet's hay to the end of the Haim. So we have Hema and Hena. Again, they are identical to each other except for which two letters? Mem versus noon. And the one with the mem is what gender?
Masculine.
Masculine. Okay? So Hema, Hana, Haim, and Hane. Okay? All right. Now, on the second person plural forms, I have for y'all, masculine plural, is atem. Atem. And this is a masculine y'all. Feminine y'all, aten. They are identical to each other, except for the mem versus the noon. And which one is masculine? The mem. Okay? Now notice that for the personal ending of the heavy consonantal endings for y'all did something, it's tem and ten, and that looks very much like atem and aten as well. You have the tavs, the segols, and the mem and noon interchange. So there's a correspondence here. And then finally, for the independent personal pronoun we, a common one is used. It's first common plural, and it's anachnu. Anachnu. All right? That's a chet here. Anachnu. Silent shiva. Anachnu. And the nu corresponds to the personal ending in the perfect first common plural. We did something is nu at the end. All right? So, let's look at the big picture here. Make that a little bit smaller. We can divide our chart into 3 parts where similar things are going on. So I've used the red line here to separate the third person forms from everything else. Okay? How are all the third person forms different from all the rest of them? What's the similarity for all of the third person forms? They all begin with what consonant? They all begin with a hey. All of them, right? Who, he, Haim, Hane. H, 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 H. I think that's in honor of Houston. So there you go. Now, all the other forms below the third person begin with what consonant? Aleph. See Aleph, 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 Aleph. Okay? So Hay's at the top, Aleph everywhere else. But between my Aleph forms, I can separate the second persons from the first persons because there's a commonality among all of the second person forms. And what's that? Not only do they have an Aleph at the front, but what do they have in the middle? All of them have a tav. And what's in the tav? Yeah, all of them have a dagesh, okay? So it's at, 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 at. At, 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 at. Okay? So the middle forms always have at. And then the last forms, the first person forms, singular and plural, there's no tav, but they all have an aleph noon, aleph noon, aleph noon. Right? So those are your independent pronouns. Let me specify something here, and that is that when we think about the function of these independent pronouns, generally speaking, their function is nominative function. What is nominative function? Subject. If I were using a language with a case system that had a nominative case, the nominative function would be the subject function, but also the predicate nominative function. If I wanted to say something like, John is a man, and I use a copula, is, a man would be nominative case in Greek. That's the predicate nominative. It's what John is. And in Hebrew, if I wanted to say, who is my father? And Darth Vader says, your father is I. Luke, your father is I. I would be in the nominative case in Greek. And if I were going to say your father is I in Hebrew, I would use ani or anohi. I would use the independent pronoun for that. Okay? So just to give you a sense for how these are used. When the pronouns are used as direct objects or as possessive pronouns, we're going to have slightly different forms of these. And they will be attached as suffixes to words, not as independent pronouns that can be written all by themselves. Let's take a look at the examples here on page 94. We have in Genesis 14:18, Vahu Kohen La'el Elyon, where who is the third masculine singular pronoun. Now he, and then the copula is missing, we have to supply it. He was Kohen, a priest. And then La'el Elyon means to God Most High. So there's just an example of who functioning as a subject pronoun. He was. And then Anohi, in the next example, is I. I, Anohi, Yaradti, have descended. Notice the T ending on Yaradti tells you who the subject is. It's I descended. I don't need the Anohi in front of it. So when I use it, it's laying stress on I as the subject pronoun there. And so he has translated as I myself have descended, which is okay. That might be a good way to translate this in a particular context. But don't always think that just because you have an explicit pronoun that you have to use oneself or myself or himself as the way to translate the pronoun, okay? You could just stress it. I have descended. All right? In Ross 11.2, we meet some pronoun forms that are known as the demonstratives. Demonstratives. We have demonstrative pronouns in English, and we can divide them between what we would call the near and the far. Okay? Sometimes people like to describe these as proximate and remote. Now, the point of orientation is the speaker. That is to say, if I'm the speaker, then I'm the point of orientation, and if something is closer to me, I might use a near demonstrative to refer to it, and if it's farther away from me, I would use the far or the remote demonstrative. What are our near demonstratives in English? This, if it's singular, and these, if it's plural. The far demonstratives in English are that, if it's singular, and those, if it's plural. All right? So, if you think about it for a minute, let's say I want to talk about a computer, okay? And there's a computer right here in front of me, but also in the back of the class, John has a computer. So if I wanted to refer to my computer, and I'm the speaker, and mine's closer to me, would I refer to this as this computer or that computer? This, okay? I really like this computer, the one that's close to me, but that computer that John has, that just wouldn't be good enough for me. I'm just kidding, of course. All right? Now, if John were to make reference to his computer that's closer to him, he wouldn't call it that computer, he would call it this computer, and he would refer to my computer as that computer because he's now the speaker, and the point of orientation is always the speaker when we think about demonstratives, okay? So, near the speaker, this and these, more remote or farther from the speaker, that and those. So what we're going to do in this chapter is we're going to learn how Hebrew uses these demonstratives, both the near and the far. Let's start with the near demonstratives in Hebrew. Near demonstratives. What we have are the forms ze, which is masculine singular here. And I want to remind you of an adjective that you've learned that was also masculine singular and ended the same way. Do you remember Yafeh? Yes, Yafé is beautiful, beautiful, or handsome, okay? This is the masculine singular form with the segel hey here. Yafé. Zay is the word for this masculine singular thing, and notice that it has a segel hey as well. By the way, is the hey a real hey or a mater hey? It is a mater. If it were a real consonant hey, what would I need to put in it? A dot called a ma-peak. I'm a peak. All right? So this is the mater hey. What is the feminine form to say this feminine thing? It's not zay, but zot. Now, do you remember how when we learned our noun and adjective endings, we learned 0, a, and t, right? Those were our masculine singular and feminine singular forms. 0, a, and t. And then the plural ones were im and ot. Okay? 0, a, t, im, and ot. So the zot is the feminine singular form for this. And notice it doesn't have a comet hey, but it does have a tav right here. And that tav marks it as feminine. Zot. Okay? So if I wanted to say this, like which person do you like? And I'm holding up a picture of Adam and Eve. And I wanted to say, well, I like this one. And I point to Adam. Which one would I use? Zay. I like zay. If I wanted to say, I like this one, and I point to Eve, I would say, I like zot. Okay? So I have to make a choice here. I can't use a neuter form of this in Hebrew. I got to use the masculine or the feminine form. Okay? Now, the plural form, which will be translated as these, is a common form. That is to say, I don't have to choose genders. I just choose one form. It's the common plural form, and it's spelled with no Z at all. There is no Z here. It's a-le. There's a sere here, doubling dot in the lama and an accent. A-le, a-le. And that means these. These. Okay? Now, if the these are all female, I'm going to use ele. If the these are all male, I'm going to use ele as well. Okay? So it is a common form for both genders, but it is used for plural. All right? So those are our forms. Now, you notice in the book that I can add the article to these forms. And how is the article pointed? If I add the article, it's going to go where? Front or back? Articles go on the front of words, and they have a hey. What goes under the article? Pathak. And then what goes in the first consonant of the noun I'm attaching it to? A dagesh forte. So if I wanted to say this, that doesn't sound like good English, does it? It's beautiful Hebrew. Beautiful Hebrew. If I wanted to say this, it would be ha zay. And I put the ha in front and the doubling dot in the zayin. Ha zay. Ha zot. If I wanted to say ha ele, could I put a doubling dot in the aleph? Nope. Not allowed, right? These. I would have to reject the dagesh forte, and what would happen to the short a vowel when the dagesh is rejected? It would compensatorily lengthen. Ha ele. These. Now I'll tell you in a minute when you would say these, but for now just know that you can put the article on these, or you might see them, and normally you would see them without the article. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and just leave these anarthrous. What does anarthrous mean? No article. Anarthrous. No article. Okay, good. So, Those are the near demonstratives. What are the far demonstratives? That. How do I do those? Well, here is the good news on the far demonstratives. When we learned the near demonstratives, we learned new words, ze, zot, and ele. When we learn the far demonstratives in Hebrew, we don't have to learn any new words. The far demonstratives, the way I say that and those, what am I going to do to get these? I'm going to borrow the third person pronouns. That's easy, but it also is going to raise some questions, because now when I see a third person pronoun, it could be he, she, it, or they, or it could be that or those. Okay? And I'm going to have to pay some close attention to it. So, what would be my masculine singular form? It would be who. So I'm going to translate who, if it's the far demonstrative, as that singular masculine thing. Feminine singular, he. That feminine singular entity. What about masculine plural? Well, we have to borrow the third person pronouns in the plural, which are what? Haim and Hane, right? So you could see Haim as our normal form, and there's the alternate form, Hema. We would translate that as those, and then the feminine plurals would be Hane. Okay, those feminine plural entities. Okay, now just like I can add the article to the near demonstratives and say the this, can I add the article to the far demonstratives and say the that or the those? Well, the answer is yes. So how would I add the article? Well, you take who, he, Haim, and Hane, and you add ha in front of it. You cannot put a doubling dot in the hey, though, can you? That doubling dot will get rejected. And so it is. Now, hey is one of those consonants that when it rejects the doubling dot, we do not get compensatory lengthening of the short vowel. We get virtual doubling of the hey that rejected the doubling dot. So that's a virtually doubled consonant in that situation. Okay? Now, what's unusual is I would have expected the same thing here. Ha-haim for the those, rejection of the dagesh. I would have expected this to just be virtually doubled and to leave the pathak short. But if you look at Ross, you'll notice that you actually have a kametz right here. So this one does compensatorily lengthen on the plural side. Okay? I don't really want you to get too caught up in this. I really don't want you to worry about it. Just know that if you have ha of any sort in front of who, he, Haim, and Hane, then that is the article. Right? You can still identify that as the article. So let me go ahead and erase this because I want to leave the basic forms up here.